Okay, well, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to come and talk about politics. I mean, it is great fun for me always to do so, partly because I'm an observer of politics. I'm not a practitioner, and so that allows me to look at it from both sides and also have some data. And that's particularly important in this day and age of polarization where people look at things through red and through blue glasses, and I'm not going to be doing that today. In fact, I view myself as somewhat of a raging moderate, where I think both sides have something to say. If I didn't believe that, in fact, I think we'd only have one party, because that one party would, in fact, dominate. But we have two vibrant parties, and this is going to be a very competitive election over a lot of different kinds of issues, and so that makes it interesting and exciting. Of course, if you're a partisan on one side or the other, it perhaps makes it a bit nerve-wracking. So what I want to do today is I want to kind of set the context for the 2012 election, but also speak to the fact, as the title suggests, that Obama has a series of problems that he faces, but he does have an ace in the hole in regards to the Tea Party. Now, most people think the Tea Party, in fact, is a big problem for Obama, that the Tea Party led the Republicans to have some exceptional and extensive victories in the 2010 midterm elections, and that the Tea Party has energized the Republican Party in a lot of different ways, and therefore the Tea Party is a problem for Obama, but I think, in fact, it's just the opposite. But we'll see how it plays out. This is a competitive election, and some people think one side's going to win or the other, but it's far, far too early to tell, and I hope I'll present some data that will sketch that out and then give you kind of my theoretical reasons for why I think that the Tea Party is a problem for Obama, and then actually present some evidence along with that as well. Now, can people in the back hear me? Is everything okay as far as that goes? Okay, good. So I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint, but I'm going to see if we can make this thing work. And of course, the first time it doesn't. There we go. Okay, let's just set some context here. This is Barack Obama's presidential approval. And it started out high, and it went down low, and it actually got pretty bad in 2011, and it's come up a little bit. It fluctuates quite a bit, but he is not doing great on presidential approval. And a lot of people believe that it's not a particularly amazing idea, that the higher your approval rating is, the more likely you are to win. These kinds of numbers suggest that Obama's, in a little bit of trouble, especially because we do not see a rise. For instance, Ronald Reagan in 1984, he had a similar trough in the first part of his term, but then in 1984, his re-election year, he started to rebound. You see a little bit of a rebound for Obama, but not very much. This is actually the most recent, actually it's not the most recent, I pulled it off last night. There's actually a brand new poll out that changes this slightly. This is basically the moving average of the trial heats between Obama and Romney. Obviously Romney's now going to be the Republican nominee. Santorum made that official, so to speak, with his announcement last week suspending his campaign. It had been pretty obvious for a while that Romney was going to be the nominee. But here, in fact, we can now officially say that he's the presumptive Republican nominee. And this tracks his support from February to April. And as you can see, the latest reading on the 16th of 2012 was 47 for Obama, 44 for Romney. And the last two polls, one was by CNN that actually had, the Gallup poll actually had Romney up by 2, and the CBS New York Times poll this morning had it tied. So this is a very, very tight race, further suggesting there are some problems facing Barack Obama. One of the things I would encourage you, for those of you who are political junkies, realclearpolitics.com is a really useful source. And the reason it's a useful source is it pulls together all the poll ratings, it pulls together articles from all over the country into one website, and you can kind of follow the election in a pretty reasonable way. And you don't ever want to pay attention to just one poll. You want to look at a lot of different polls to try to get an average, and that's in fact what this is. This is an average of all the polls taken. So that whether you might be a fan of a Fox News poll or you might be a fan of an MSNBC poll, depending on your ideological leanings, this kind of doesn't worry about that. It throws them all in together to generate an average. So that's why, and you can see that Romney has been doing a little bit better of late. Obama's been struggling a little bit of late, though he did have a surge, as we talked about. Okay, well, why is Obama's re-election far from a sure thing? The first reason is the economy, and everybody knows that. The second reason is the economy. Everybody knows that. And I think you can probably guess the third one, the economy. It is all about the economy. If, in fact, the economy was rolling, where we had GDP growth of 4 to 5%, Barack Obama would be coasting to a comfortable re-election victory. We do not have that right now. It is going to be very close and very tight because the economy is kind of doing better, but it's also kind of struggling. And it depends on which kinds of data you want to bring to bear to answer the particular question about the state of the economy. And it's really much a perception. Things are, in fact, better than they had been, but that's hardly a compelling argument for re-election. And that's exactly what Mitt Romney's going to say every day. Yes, things may be a little bit better, but they could be a lot better if I were president. And so it'll be a real battle between them. And this graph highlights the importance of the economy. This is the economy by the presidential vote from 48, Harry Truman's victory in 1948 to 2008. This correlation is a very strong one, and it basically says as the income, this down here is growth in personal income. That is the average growth in income. As it grows higher, this is the incumbent versus the challenger vote share, that the incumbent does better. So for example, if you go up to the top part of that graph, you see Ronald Reagan in 1984. Ronald Reagan won a handy victory in 1984, and he won because the economy was doing really well. Right now, economists are guessing, and I want to underline the word guessing, and I don't mean to insult any economists, but they make predictions, but they're really mostly guesses, frankly. They come out, they say, oh, well, the job growth is going to be really good this month, and then it's disappointing. Oh, the job growth is going to be a problem, and then it turns out to be really good. They have figured out a way to game the system because they get paid very well to make these guesses that I could probably do just as well. But right now, their guesses are that personal income will grow at about 2%. And if you go to that graph at 2%, it's right to hear this point, meaning that it's basically a tie. That the election looks like a flip of a coin at this point in time with the growth of personal income. If the growth of personal income happens to pop up to about 3 percentage points, Obama's going to look very strong. If the economy goes down to 1%, Mitt Romney's going to look very strong. Now, I want to stress here that it isn't like voters like you yourself or you yourself look at the growth of personal income and then decide who you're going to vote for. That's not what goes on. What goes on is that the economy allows the incumbent certain things to do in the campaign. If the economy is growing well, you can run a very positive campaign talking about all your accomplishments. If the economy is struggling, you can't do that. You have to run a much more negative campaign, a much different kind of campaign, because you don't have the evidence that allows you to support your claims. So it isn't that the economy itself drives the outcome of the election directly, it's that it shapes the kinds of messages you have. So for those of you who remember the 1984 election, Ronald Reagan ran a series of commercials that are called Morning in America. And Morning in America were fabulous commercials. And they were fabulous because they had these great pictures and they talked about all the growth in the economy, how things had come back. But they had real data behind them. He couldn't make it up. I mean, can you imagine in 2008 with Lehman Brothers and other things collapsing, that McCain says, oh, things are just fine. In fact, he tried to say that at one point and he got pummeled for it. Why? Because the data don't support it. So the bottom line is that the economy drives things, and we're in a position right now that it's nip and tuck. And it turns out that, interestingly, it's not the first quarter of this year, it's the second quarter, basically from April to July, that's going to shape the outcome of the election. What's the economy going to be doing in that quarter? And we don't really know yet. There's some reasons to believe it's growing, but it's still close. So part of this talk is premised on the fact that the economy is going to continue to struggle. It's going to be doing a little bit better, but it's not going to be doing so well that Obama can claim an easy victory, but it's not going to be doing so badly that Mitt Romney's able to claim an easy victory, just like Jimmy Carter got beat in 1980. You know, a lot of people try to figure out, is Barack Obama Jimmy Carter, or is Barack Obama Ronald Reagan? He's neither. He's somewhere in between, and that's what makes this race even more interesting. So here are some of the economic indicators that most of you probably already know about. We have 8% unemployment, approximately 8.2%, which is high by recent standards. Last month's job numbers were weak, and that's caused some problems for Obama because it makes it harder for him to argue that things have turned the corner. And we don't know what future job gains look like. I mean, again, there's all these various indicators. And the bottom line is that the economy is far from robust, as I just said. So here is some additional data that tells you about the economic confidence that the country has. And as you can see that in early 2011, it wasn't doing too bad. And then the fall and the summer of 2011 looked really grim for Barack Obama. Things looked really bad. The economy looked like it might be going into a double-dip recession, and everything was a problem, and people were starting to pound on him and think he wasn't even going to win re-election. They started to equate him with Jimmy Carter, which is really not a good thing if you're president of the United States. You don't want to be equated with Jimmy Carter. You want to be equated with Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton, at least on the economic front, perhaps not on other fronts. But I'll leave others to sort that out. But as we can see that the economy has been doing better, but it's still minus 19. That is that people still have more negative feelings towards the economy. And down in the bottom of the graph, when Bill Clinton won re-election in 1996, that graph was not minus 15, it was plus 15. That is that people had a lot more faith in the economy in 1996 than they do right now. And Bill Clinton rolled to a pretty easy re-election victory over Bob Dole. In 1992, when George Bush Sr. lost his re-election bid, it was at minus 5. So by that comparison, Barack Obama looks in trouble. That is, the economy, people's perceptions of it continue to be weak, but maybe it'll continue to increase. If the job numbers pop up, which again, I'm pretty confident that we're not sure yet, and so that's, it's pretty easy to say I'm sure about not being sure. That's really kind of like, you now know why I'm not getting paid to do this talk. I mean, that's not all that clever. But it is true that we don't know. And so maybe things will change, but the bottom line is that we have to be very careful. This is a more interesting graph because it actually sorts it out by partisanship. No surprise, Democrats are more optimistic. Why? Because their president, so to speak, is in the White House. Republicans do not like Barack Obama. In fact, Mitt Romney's strongest suit he's got going for him is the fact that even though Republicans have doubts about Mitt Romney, or a lot of them, their dislike of Obama is so strong that they're going to back Mitt Romney. But the troubling news for Obama are these independents. These independents are closer to the Republicans than they are to the Democrats in the assessments of the economy. If I was Barack Obama, I would be worried about that kind of number. Because in this country, probably 85% of the people have already decided who they're voting for. Maybe even 90%. You know enough about the president, so you may decide you're going to vote for or against him. You probably have enough information about Romney. There's only a handful of people out there who are undecided. And those are independents. There's not many independents left in this country because of the polarization, but that number is a problem for Obama. If it was closer to 15 or 10, minus 10, that would be of some help for him. Here is are you satisfied with the state of the country? A whopping 22%. That is not very high. And take a look at these comparative numbers. Bill Clinton's re-election, 45% of the country was satisfied with the direction of the country. Ronald Reagan, 49%. Bush's defeat in 1992, 22%. Very similar to this kind of thing. Again, you can begin to see that there's context, there's data that gives you good reason to believe that Barack Obama should be in trouble because of the economy. So, I showed you some data earlier about trial heats, where in fact it's very close between Obama and Romney. And therefore we should predict a close election. I think that's very problematic because even 6 months out from an election, these trial heats are very erratic indicators because the country's mood can change. The economy could suddenly tank or it could suddenly start to take off, and that's going to change people's moods a lot. So let's just provide some data about that. Here is 1992, April 1992. If you relied on trial heats, George Bush Sr. had a comfortable 10-point lead over Bill Clinton. He had a comfortable 10-point lead, and that went on to flip because Bill Clinton beat George W. Bush comfortably in the 1992 election. You'll also remember that Ross Perot ran in that contest as well. The bottom line is that this changed. Bill Clinton looked like he was a loser based on all the polls. He was in trouble. He had a lot of problems ranging from smoking marijuana or actually not smoking it, if you remember. He only inhaled it. No, he didn't inhale it. What did he do? He didn't inhale it. That's what it is. He also redefined sex. He's a, what do you say? You got to give him some credit, I guess. But nonetheless, he had a few problems dodging the draft or whatever. But he turns us around. So that's one example. Here's another example, April 1980. It looks like it's neck and neck. Ronald Reagan has 43%, Ronald Reagan has 44% in that poll, Carter has 43. It looks like it's going to be nip and tuck. And that's what the Electoral College looked the night of the election. I mean, I can remember at that time I was in graduate school. I was 22 years old. I just started graduate school at Princeton. I loved politics. I knew this was going to be a close election. And so I remember, organizing a bunch of friends, getting a bunch of food, beer. We're going to watch the election and see who won. I mean, most of the people in the room were for Carter. We were going to sit down, and we all thought it was going to be close, and it was a slaughter. It was a slaughter. In fact, Jimmy Carter announced his defeat even before the polls closed in California, irritating California Democrats because basically the race was over and they think their turnout suffered because people said, why bother to vote? And that hurt some Democrats down the ballot. I mean, Carter realized how bad it was early on, and he just basically acknowledged that with an early speech. So an election that looked very close all of a sudden turned dramatically, and in fact, even in the fall campaign. So, politics has a certain stability to it. Democrats tend to vote for Democrats, Republicans vote for Republicans, but they will change from time to time, especially on the economy, and here's an example of wholesale change. So if the economy is struggling, and all the data that I'm suggesting right now gives you reason to believe that Romney can win, I still think that, this is where we're going to go with the main part of the talk, that the ace in the hole that Obama has is in fact the Tea Party. And I want to try to sketch out how that, in fact, is the case. And try to sketch it out in not just a couple of examples, but try to step back a little bit so you have a kind of a framework, so to speak, to think about it. So as I said, there's the Tea Party there. Let's assume, and this is not a bad way to approach politics, is that there are two types of party politicians. There are purists and there are pragmatists. The purists are ones who were driven solely by ideology. That's what they care about. That's what drives their preferences. And so these actors would rather lose than moderate in the pursuit of votes. Pragmatists, by contrast, they like ideology. They may be left-wing or right-wing, whatever it is, but they want to win elections. That they, in fact, would rather have half a loaf than no loaf, and so they would be willing to trade ideology for votes. The purists aren't willing to do that. And let me give you some examples of this that come from the 2010 election. Jim DeMint, who is a senator from South Carolina, he is a classic example of a purist. It says, I've been in the majority with the Republicans who didn't have principles, and we've embarrassed ourselves and lost credibility in front of the country. Frankly, I'm at the point where I'd rather lose fighting for the right cause than win fighting for the wrong cause. He doesn't want to give up any ideology for victory. He wants to be a purist, and he's prepared to make that sacrifice. Karl Rove is a classic example of a pragmatist. Yes, he's a conservative. Yes, he's ideological, but he wants to win. And they were battling at this point over the Senate races that were unfolding in the 2010 race, which kind of gives you a hint of what I'm going to argue. In 2010, at the House level, especially here in the state of Tennessee, a bunch of Tea Partiers did pretty well in the House elections. But that wasn't true in the Senate elections. There were 3 cases where moderate Republicans were beat by Tea Partiers. One of them is my favorite candidate of all time, Christine O'Donnell. How many people remember the name Christine O'Donnell? You see, this is why she's my favorite. Why? Because she had to go on television and say she wasn't a witch. I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, I'm not a flip-flopper. I'm not inexperienced. I'm not an adulterer. I'm not a witch. This is really cool, okay? And she says this because it turns out that when she was like a teenager, she dabbled in witchcraft. And so, this is how they dealt with it. Well, she was a very conservative candidate who beat a very moderate candidate in the Republican primary, handing the Senate seat over to the Democrats. It was the replacement, actually, I think, for Biden. And this was just a gift. This was just a gift. And it happened in Colorado. It almost happened in Alaska. And there's one other state, and I'm trying to think of the third state right now. I'm blanking on it. But 3 states had very conservative candidates from the Tea Party win the nomination that kept the Democrats in the game, that allowed them actually to stay in the majority in the U.S. Senate. And Christine O'Donnell, and they're fighting this. And basically, Karl Rove is saying, look, I mean, I'm a Republican, but I want to win the Senate. And right now, because we nominate Christine O'Donnell, which satisfies Jim DeMint the purist, we're going to lose that seat, and the Democrats are going to keep control of the U.S. Senate. And let me tell you something, that matters. And it matters hugely. Even if Barack Obama wins re-election, it matters who controls the U.S. Senate, because almost surely during the next term of the next president, there will be Supreme Court nominees chosen, for example. And so that's going to make a difference. And you know, people may have preferences on where they want to go, but this makes a huge difference. Robert Bork is not on the U.S. Supreme Court because the Democrats controlled the U.S. Senate at the time. And we will see how this all plays out, but it makes a difference. And it makes differences in lots of other ways as well. And so you have these two that are battling it out. Well, what happens here is that basically after a party loses the presidency, like the Republicans did in 2008, like the Democrats did in 1968, or like the Republicans did in 1960, or even as the Republicans in 1932, when a party loses the presidency, they go through what you might call kind of a soul searching. They want to figure out what they did wrong and how to fix it. And these two cases, the purists and the pragmatists, come alive and they battle. The purists say, we didn't win because we weren't ideologically strong enough, that we needed to nominate a true conservative. So, for example, the purists attack John McCain for being too moderate, that if he'd run a real conservative campaign, that if he'd been a real conservative, he would have won that contest. At the same time, the pragmatists are arguing, wait a second, we lost the last election. We can't go to the right, we can't go to the left, we have to go to the middle because that's where the votes were. We lost this last election. So they have a very heated battle because they're out of power. You know, the Democrats, the left wing has been unhappy with Obama, but they can't say much. Why? Because he's got all the power, he's president of the United States, and there's not a lot that they can do about it. But when you're out of power, like the Republicans not controlling the presidency, you have this battle. But in the early rounds, the purists have the upper hand. And the reason why the purists have the upper hand is they're more angry. Because the purists think Barack Obama is way out there. They think he's super liberal, that he's super committed to putting this country on a path of destruction. Moderate Republicans don't see it that way. Yes, they don't like Obama. Yes, they want to replace Obama, but it has a different kind of dynamic. So there's much more urgency to the purist message, much more ability to raise money, to get activists, to get them involved, and to control the process. And so this battle comes up with the purists, and in the first round, and we'll talk about the 2012 election in a second, and Romney's victory, but you have this battle going on, and the purists usually have the upper hand. And when they have the upper hand, they nominate a candidate like, and let's see where I've got here. Let me just present this data for a second. Presidents, the party immediately after losing the White House, that next election, they've been averaging 41% of the vote. So that is that in the 2012 election, the Republican share of the vote, the average over the last 60 years, well, not 60, 70, 80 years, has been 41%. In other words, you get killed. You get really beat badly. How many people know the name Alf Landon? A few people. Excellent, you guys follow politics. In fact, this is a true story. I gave a talk at Swarthmore earlier in the fall, and and you'll see a picture of Alf Landon in a second. And this is a group of, 18 to 22-year-olds. And, the Swarthmore students, they're good students like Vanderbilt, et cetera. But these kids struck me as like super nerds. I mean, super nerds. And so I decided to put up on screen. I said, if anybody can tell me who this picture is, put a picture of Alf Landon. Middle-aged white guy. There was nothing distinguishing about him at all. I didn't even recognize a picture of him when I found it. And I follow this stuff. So I decided to ask, anybody who can tell me who this is, I'm going to give them a Vanderbilt sweatshirt. Figuring no one's going to get this. So I put the picture up, and this young woman in the front, who's 19 years old, oh, that's Alf Landon. And I said, that's Alf Landon. I said, are you from Kansas? I'm from Massachusetts. I said, are you Republican? No, I'm a Democrat. And I thought, I had to get her a T-shirt, a sweatshirt. I mean, I shipped it to her. I mean, So, but Alf Landon is an example of the purists getting the nomination. What happened to Alf Landon in 1936? He won 2 states. And that's a picture of Alf Landon, for those of you who don't know. And I don't make that bet anymore because I can't afford Vanderbilt T-shirts and sweatshirts. Especially in an audience this large, et cetera, I'm sure I would go down like a stone. Here's another one, Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater was a classic example of a purist getting the nomination and going down to massive defeat. Massive defeat. And you know, the irony is that I'm not sure Barry Goldwater could get the nomination in the Republican Party right now. I mean, because he was socially very moderate. He was socially very moderate. He just didn't want the government involved in anything. He was much more of a libertarian. He's kind of like a Ron Paul figure, really. But nonetheless, Barry Goldwater, you know, was a purist, got the nomination after the Republicans had the party, control of the White House, lose the White House in '60. They have this big battle. He gets the nomination, and they go down to massive defeat. I mean, Lyndon Johnson won 45 states that year. Here's another one. George McGovern. It happens on both sides of the aisle. The Democrats lost the presidency in 1968. Richard Nixon won it. There was a battle between the purists and the pragmatists. And McGovern, being a purist, won the nomination and went on to massive defeat. He won one state. He didn't even carry his home state. He won one state, Massachusetts. I can remember, I was probably 14 at the time, he won the first state was called was Massachusetts. I thought he had a chance. That was, no, not really. And so then, of course, the question becomes our current nominee of Mitt Romney. And when you think about the purist pragmatist distinction, some of you probably already think, well, wait a second. Santorum is the purist, and Romney's the pragmatist, and that's absolutely right. And the advantage Romney had was that none of the purist candidates ran this year. And the real obvious choice would have been Sarah Palin. If Sarah Palin had chosen to run, all these other candidates, whether it be Santorum or Kane or whoever, most of those people wouldn't have run. And she would have had the field to herself, and I think she would have been very formidable in the Republican nomination, but she chose not to run. For whatever series of reasons, partly because I think she probably realized that she'd get the nomination but maybe not win the presidency, or maybe she just wants to make money. I don't know what the reasons are. We can't infer intent on this type of stuff, but she chose not to. Romney has won the nomination, and he is a pragmatist, so does this provide an opportunity? Well, maybe, but we're going to talk about some of the costs that Romney has incurred in getting the nomination because of the purist influence. But before I go too long about the purists and how the Republican Party or the Democratic Party always suffers, there's a case that needs to be discussed at least briefly. This is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan won the nomination in 1980, and it was a purist victory. He beat the more moderate George Bush Sr. He beat Bob Dole, other people who were more moderate. He was the purist candidate. And of course, he went on not only to win the presidency, but he went on to reshape really the discussion of government and the discussion of politics for a long period of time. And he's still revered. All the Republican candidates want to wrap themselves in the Reagan mantle. Even some Democrats do from time to time. And he's going to go down, regardless of whether you're on the left or the right side, he's going to go down as a top 10, top 15 president when it's all said and done for a number of different reasons. He became a success. So that sometimes purists can change the party and change the country. It usually doesn't happen, but sometimes it can. Of course, he benefited from the fact that there was huge doubts about him when he won his election in 1980. He did not win because people liked Ronald Reagan. He won because Jimmy Carter was such a disaster. And so that there's very clear evidence of this. But he managed to take that opportunity, and he transformed the Republican Party and really transformed the nature of the debate. And I say that, there's some people in this room who are, boy, I can't stand Reagan. Yeah, fine. But these are the facts that we're dealing with. So there is some hope, purist. But in this case, Romney's not a purist. He's a pragmatist. As he actually transformed the party, it's hard to tell at this point in time. We're not even sure he'll be able to win. But this is some of the problems that Romney's facing because of the purist influence. First of all, he's had to tack to the right. He's been forced to tack to the right more so than I think he wanted to do. For example, Rick Santorum did have a big effect on this race. And I was teasing about economists being able to predict ahead of time. I never would have thought that Rick Santorum would be one of the last candidates standing. I thought he was running so he could increase his speaker fees. It's what I thought. I did not think he was going to be a serious candidate. And I was simply, frankly, wrong about that. He tapped into some anger, and he tapped into the purist anger in particular, though, because nobody else was particularly effective. Newt Gingrich is entertaining, but let's be serious. It's just not, he can't, he's really smart, really talented, but just not disciplined. not disciplined enough. And as a result of this, for example, because of some of the efforts by Santorum and the right wing, you know, the country and particularly the Republican Party has had to have a discussion about an issue that had been settled in the 50s about contraception. And that's not good for the Republican Party. And that has created a huge gender gap that's probably given Romney huge reasons to try to find a qualified female for his VP because of some of these missteps. You know, I don't think Romney wanted that debate at all, but it was forced upon him because of some of the purist uprising, so to speak. And it's a problem. I mean, I have students in my class, very conservative, very much anti-Obama, who are just like, can't believe that contraception has become an issue. But that's an example of tacking to the right. Romney's also pretty bruised from the battle. I think he can recover from a lot of that, but he's been, you know, he's been taking a pretty hard pounding. And I've actually interacted with Romney two different times, the third time very briefly. He actually is exceptionally intelligent. He's actually got a pretty good sense of humor. He does stiffen up on the campaign trail, there's no doubt about that. Whether he can in fact relax and just kind of be himself, it's not entirely clear to me. But it is also true that he's been facing a very tough nomination process, which is captured in this third point about evangelical doubts about Romney. There is real bias out there against Mormons, especially among Southern evangelicals. I've been collecting data about this. It is absolutely clear that Romney probably would have won the nomination 6 to 7 weeks earlier if he had not been a Mormon, that there was just a lot of discrimination against him just for the reasons that are said here by Jeffers. I mean, basically argues that Romney's not a Mormon. And so now these people who are so upset about Romney, they're still going to vote for Romney because they see their choice, frankly, being between a Mormon and a Muslim. That's frankly what they do. I mean, that's the facts. 75% of Southern evangelicals over the age of 60 claim that Barack Obama's a Muslim. They don't really believe that, I don't think. It's just their way of saying, I don't like this guy. And so that's what's going on. It's just staggering. It's staggering. But that bias is out there. But it's not going to hurt Romney in the general election. There's doubts about him, but he's got the benefit of having Barack Obama his nominee because there's a lot of unhappiness with Barack Obama. And this polarization in the country is very much the case. Liberals, for example, think Obama's a moderate. Yeah, think he's a moderate. And then the conservatives think he's crazy liberal. It's just an amazing shift that's unfolded in this country. And I don't know where Obama, you know, my sense is Obama's governed mostly from the middle. He's not governed from the left very much. But nonetheless, there's these perceptions. So this is a problem. But it's not going to hurt him in the general election. It's because the evangelical community will turn out and support Mitt Romney. And hopefully one of the processes of all this is people will just learn more about the Mormon religion and realize that it's like a lot of other religions. It has its views, et cetera, and people can kind of come to a conclusion, but not necessarily view all the stereotypes that are out there. But there's still this concern. And if you look at this last statement, I mean, it's, you know, again, they're not wild about this opportunity. But again, I think that Romney, because he's tacked to the right, he's now got to find a way to tack to the center. And can he, in fact, pull the Etch-a-Sketch? I don't know that he can. This is his advisor who said that it was all an Etch-a-Sketch, and that company must be like ecstatic. I mean, I wish I'd known about it just about an hour before. He could have bought stock and made some money. But you know, can Romney reset? We've certainly seen it with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had huge problems in 1992. He managed to reset. Candidates sometimes can. And so I would not rule out this possibility that, in fact, the Etch-a-Sketch analogy is somewhat the case, because I believe that Romney is fundamentally a moderate. I mean, he's conservative on social issues, but I think fundamentally on the economy and other stuff like that, he's a moderate, and he's a business guy, and he's driven by the data. And so if you can convince him of something that's driven by the data, I think he goes along with it. So the next test is going to be the VP pick. What is Romney going to do with the vice presidential pick? And this will tell us a lot about the purist influence that Romney's facing. First of all, his background. When John McCain, and I don't know if you've seen the movie on HBO Game Change, you've read the book Game Change, but it is true without a doubt that John McCain wanted to choose Lieberman, that is Gore's VP, to be his VP. That was his first choice. And in fact, McCain was prepared to choose him and then say he'd run one term and basically try to govern from the middle, try to govern in a nonpartisan fashion. It fit all of McCain's predispositions and also dealt to some degree with the age issue. McCain couldn't do it. The right wing would have gone ballistic if he had tried to do that. So he had to shore up his own base because there were doubts among the right wing about McCain, and then he, of course, chose famously Sarah Palin, which is was a blessing and a curse for the McCain campaign. So McCain didn't have that flexibility. What is Romney going to do? So does Romney shore up the base? And you can think about people like Huckabee and Marco Rubio. These are shore up the base candidates. These are candidates playing to the purists, playing to those who have doubts about Romney. But what if Romney chose someone like Olympia Snowe? I would love it just to watch the right wing go crazy. I mean, again, and I'm an observer. Remember, I'm here from the middle. I'm looking at both sides. This is not said. Those of you who are liberal, you would even enjoy it more because it'd be total entertainment. Actually, part of me, I think, is maybe he should choose John Huntsman and then double down on the Mormons, and then we'll see what we can get as an effect. There we go. That has potential. But what does he do? And I don't know what he'll do. I will tell you one thing, having watched the process a number of different times and known key people in various that have been part of these processes, been in the room when the decision's made, that I'll tell you one thing, that it's actually usually not as strategic as you think. And what I mean by that is that, for example, when Clinton chose Gore, there was a lot of people on Clinton's staff that wanted Dick Gephardt because Gephardt would get them in Missouri. They did not want Gore because Gore wasn't going to bring them anything new to the table. And Clinton kept pushing back and saying, but wait a second, we all agree that Gore would be the better president than Gephardt, and so why aren't we going with Gore? Well, Gore doesn't give you anything electorally. We need to go with Gephardt. He'll give you something electorally. And Clinton ended the conversation by pointing out to this one advisor, but I could die, and we're not going to do that. That ended the discussion. And I think that George Bush did the same thing with Dick Cheney. Why? Because Dick Cheney, what he brought, Wyoming? I mean, that's not, it wasn't done for electoral reasons. It was done because he believed he'd govern better with Cheney. So that one of the things that will drive Romney isn't just the electoral connection. He will want to have somebody who will be ready to be president. And that was the big problem McCain faced, because he chose somebody who the country collectively had concerns about whether they'd be president. Plenty of talent, and frankly could get up to speed because Sarah Palin has lots of talent. But in the end, a lot of these calculations and all the speculation from the news media will be somewhat misplaced, because in the end it's going to be somewhat of a personal choice by Romney. Who is the person he thinks could be president if something happens to him, and who's the person he wants to govern with? And that's fundamentally a personal choice. And he might choose any of these people. I doubt he'd choose Olympia Snowe, though that would provide entertainment. But there's lots of people out there, and there'll be constant speculation. But one of the things I want to stress as I close before I take questions is that we have a 24/7 news cycle that's constantly needed to be fed, and the news media needs something to talk about. And so they will talk and analyze about every piece of data. Like, they'll take the most recent trial heat and make a big deal about it as it's a sign that all of a sudden things are working towards Romney or working towards Obama, when in fact they're missing the broader picture, that these things are filled with lots of error and noise, and you can't just pay attention to one poll. You can't pay attention to one bad speech. You can't pay attention to one mistake. You've got to look at the overall context. And right now, that overall context does not paint a favorable picture for Obama. But because this country is reluctant to change horses in midstream, the last time a president's party only served one term in office was Jimmy Carter, and that dates back to the Civil War. It doesn't happen very much. The public tends to stick with somebody for the party for 8 years. And then they do change after that. I mean, I think the Republicans will be in very good shape in 2016. And you combine that with some of the Tea Party pressures, I do believe Romney has a bit of an uphill battle. But I would not underestimate Romney. If he had faced a lot of tough questions and has managed to get the nomination, he's going to start looking much more presidential. When he gives his acceptance speech in Tampa in late August, it's going to be a setting that's going to make him again look pretty presidential. He will make it a tough race, I suspect. Now, if the economy suddenly does go north or south dramatically, then that will change the context. but realize that there are these structural features at work that are going to be driving elections, and the individual machinations of whether it's a mistake by the Etch-a-Sketch guy, or it's, you know, like the woman who works for CNN attacking Ann Romney. That was dumb. It was pretty dumb. But it's not, you know, no one's going to look back. If anybody writes an article and says, well, Barack Obama lost the election because of that, that's just silly. That's not the case. It's the economy, it's the economy, and it's the economy. But in this case, the economy is pointing in lots of different directions. And so we'll see who can make a sell. And Barack Obama has not started to campaign yet. And when he starts to campaign, he's pretty good at it. And so that we'll see. But Romney's also been doing a lot of debates. So it'll be a fun contest, and maybe I will be able to sit down with a bowl of popcorn and have a long night and not have it called right away. But I'm not certainly predicting that. I'm just hoping for some good popcorn. So on that note, I will turn it over. I was told about 10 to 15 minutes for questions, which looks like it's about perfect timing. Yes, ma'am. And I will try to restate the questions so people can hear what's going on. Yeah.
How much does the fear rhetoric?
Okay.
How much does the fear rhetoric play into presidential rhetoric?
I don't know if did people hear that? Okay, the question was, how much does the fear rhetoric play into presidential rhetoric? Well, is that a fair recount? Yeah. Well, first of all, this is going to be a very nasty campaign. It's going to be hard hitting on both sides. Why? Because Obama doesn't have a huge amount to run on. You have the super PAC ads, and you have parties that are polarized. So the three ingredients will bring a lot of negativity. I'm not so sure. First of all, as was indicated, I wrote a book defending negativity, and so I'm not very worried about attack politics. And the reason I'm not worried about attack politics is we need to know the downsides of candidates. And so that if you compare the kinds of rhetoric that's unfolded in this campaign versus campaigns 200 years ago, it's child's play. Thomas Jefferson was referred to in 1800 as the Antichrist. That's pretty hard-hitting. Lincoln was referred to as a buffoon. So American politics is filled with harsh rhetoric. It's always been the case. And I think it reflects the fact we're polarized. And at some point, we'll depolarize and things will move back to the center and people become more moderate. But when we didn't have the anger politics, we had parties that were very similar and people didn't like that because there wasn't a choice. Now we have a choice, they don't like that. And so it kind of goes back and forward. But right now this country turnout in the country and the elections have been increasing with more and more negativity. Why? Because the stakes are high. People realize that and they're turning out. So there are some upsides to it. There's some downsides because what we really want to see, and Jim Cooper, our local representative, will talk about this, is that sometimes it's gotten so nasty that people aren't willing to talk to each other, and that's a potential cost. And I think you see a little bit of that. And I suspect that this campaign, Obama's going to, Obama's a Chicago politician. He's going to do what's necessary, and that's the nature of it. And so, but it's politics.
I have a button that says "Hope Trumps Fear."
Yeah. Well.
And I do believe that.
And I think that people, and Obama will try to tap into that, but there's also going to be a lot of harsh rhetoric. But I wouldn't panic about it. You have a mic there, so you might as well go.
I was wondering, do you know the percentage of Republican voters that are identified more as Tea Party voters?
Yes, it's a little hard to be precise about that, but right now about a third of Republicans are Tea Partiers, but it really depends on how you measure it. If you ask people, do you identify with the Tea Party, that number goes down. If you ask them, do you support the Tea Party, that number goes up. So for example, the Vanderbilt poll, that I direct that does surveys of Tennessee, we ask that question all the time, and you get about 40% who like the ideas, and it goes down quite a bit if you identify. The Tea Party, the most recent data I've seen is that some of the anger in the Tea Party is dissipating a little bit. And that's certainly good news for Romney, and if it allows him to move more towards the center, that's very good news. But there's still a lot of unhappiness out there. But as the economy comes back, which we all hope it does by whatever mechanism, then a lot of this unhappiness will dissipate once people start, feeling better about the economy. Yes, sir.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why Obama had been so reluctant
Well, I mean, I don't have, first of all, the question was about Barack Obama being more transparent, maybe as a way to summarize it, that he took too long, in this person's opinion, to release, for instance, his birth certificate, et cetera. You know, I don't have an answer to the particular motivations of the president, but I have to say that I never understood why people didn't think he was born in this country. And so that, but, you know, and I also have to say that, you know, both sides are going to have a different view of it. That is, we've never had that happen before. Part of my theory is that a lot of people in this country just don't think Hawaii counts. And so, you know, and at a certain point it didn't, right? But that's, you know, that's my optimistic interpretation. Remember that what's going on here is in this country right now, because we have polarization, and I really try to stress this to my class and to people in general, is that because there's polarization, we really do look at the world through these partisan lenses. And that's fine. We all have our partisanship, and your partisanship's largely a product of how you were raised. There's actually some data that suggests it might even be genetic, which is like, then my parents have a lot to explain for. But the bottom line is that we have this information, and you know, you view it through that lens, and it biases it a lot. And so that I don't think Barack Obama's that's been a problem for Obama. I suspect the bigger problems that I have with Obama is that when the health care bill was passed, why didn't he tell the American public what it was about rather than letting other people do it? I also think that he has waffled on lots of different issues. I mean, he got advice not to do the issue of contraception within the Catholic hospitals. He got that advice and he overrode it, then he backtracked. And so there are lots of reasons why you should have doubts about Barack Obama. But I don't think the birth certificate is probably a key one, but I think it reflects the partisanship of this country. And there are going to be things that, you know, let's say Romney's president, there's going to be various things the left is going to say about the Mormon church that, you know, I hope people on the left are outraged by, because it's going to be a problem. And that's where we need to step back and make sure we kind of take off these partisan lenses from time to time. Yes, sir.
Yes, I thank you for your presentation. And two things, the Trayvon Martin situation. For how much do you see it driving this election? And also the income inequality issue, how much do you see the two of them independent of one another driving this election?
Right. Well, the Trayvon Martin situation is obviously a tragedy by any standard, and I think some people have fueled it in ways, but they're not. I don't think it'll have any effect on the presidential election unless, for example, Barack Obama wants it to become a big issue, or Mitt Romney says something that makes it a big issue. I suspect that that's not going to play out. It's just a tragedy that has to be sadly dealt with. On the income inequality front, this is a really interesting question, and it's beginning to hit home more so. People are going around the country talking more about it, whether you're talking about Occupy Nashville or Occupy Wall Street or whatever the case may be. The income inequality in this country is really dramatic. In fact, there's a brand new colleague of mine at Vanderbilt who's written a book called Unequal Democracy, which he, by the way, is the most nonpartisan person you'd ever come across. And he just shows how bad the income inequality is, and it's growing, and it's not getting better. And so this is an issue that it's really puzzling to me why people don't make it an issue. But I think part of it is that if you ask the American public what proportion of people make more than $250,000 a year, they tend to be about 25%. That is that they think a lot of people make that kind of money, when in fact about less than 1% make that kind of money. So part of it is it's an informational issue that hasn't been presented, but when you give people the right information, then all of a sudden things like support for the Bush tax cuts or eliminating them increases. So that's a debate that's beginning to be engaged. The data are there. There is no doubt there's been income inequality. And in fact, a lot of people in the Republican Party, and I wouldn't be surprised if Romney is among these, sees that the income inequality poses real problems for the country's long-term health. And so that, you know, and ironically, Romney might be the one that's better able to do this than Obama, because being on the Republican side, he's the one who can get away with it more easily. And that's one of the ironies of politics, that you have the credibility to do that kind of thing. But yeah, it's an issue, and we'll see how it plays out. And with Romney's wealth, it could in fact play out, but it's hard for a president to talk about someone being elitist because every time you walk into a room, they play Hail to the Chief. You got the Air Force One. I mean, you know, it's a pretty good gig from what I gather. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to see if you could comment on if you think the spouses will have an impact on the election. I noticed there's been articles about Ms. Romney's wife and the fact that she's a housewife. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but the fact that you have unlimited cash at your disposal does make it much easier being a housewife versus a working mom
Mm-hmm.
or someone that didn't have that. Do you think that will have an impact on the women voters maybe?
Well, the question is about the wives of the candidates and what, you know, what impact they might have. Well, first of all, Ann Romney, I think, is frankly a huge asset to Mitt Romney. I mean, I've watched her in action a couple of times, and she's, I'm like thinking, why isn't she running? And obviously Michelle Obama is as well. And traditionally, though, I mean, there's a lot of speculation about the wives of presidents or the spouses more broadly, since obviously Hillary Clinton has a very special spouse. But usually they don't make, there's no evidence that they make a difference in the election. However, I do think that in the case of Romney, trying to personalize him more, Ann Romney would really help on that front. And, you know, and Michelle Obama's, you know, I think earned high marks as First Lady, just as Laura Bush did. So I think in the end it probably won't matter, though the dust-up last week between Hillary Rosen of CNN and Ann Romney was not something that the Obama campaign welcomed because there is a huge gender gap right now in the country, about 17–18% lead for Obama over Romney among women. In fact, if women only could vote since 1980, every election would have been won by the Democrats, save 1984, where Mondale still would have lost barely. But every other year the Democrats would have won. I mean, there's been a long-term trend that women have been supporting more the Democrats, but it's been exacerbated this year, partly because of the tacking to the right, I think, and we'll see if it's able to go. Way in the back.
I have two questions. One, how is Romney going to be moderate in his first term if he wins? Because he's going to be beholden to the right during that time. Secondly, how much is race going to figure in this re-election bid?
The two questions as people heard. One is, how is Romney going to govern from a moderate position if he wins, because the right will try to pull him to the right? And the second is the role of race. Well, Romney can govern moderate because he's going to be president. If he wins, he's president of the United States, and it's very unlikely someone's going to challenge him. And so he's going to govern the way he thinks is best, and he'll go back and forward. He'll try to placate the right at some points, but I don't see that as a big concern. The role of race in this election is very hard to estimate. There are some people who have pretty sound data that suggest that Obama would have won 2% more of the vote in 2008 without race. But the difficulty is that while there were a set of people who would not vote for Barack Obama because he was African American, there were also a set of people who voted for him because he was African American. And so that you net that out, there's still a bias out there, but it plays out. I think it plays out in a lot of different ways. I think, for instance, the discussion about being a Muslim is tied. It's a way of bringing race in through a religious angle. How to estimate that is a nightmare. Obama's election is a testament to an amazing process that we call democracy in this country. But at the same time, it's not that we're in a post-racial society. And so it will matter, but I don't know how much it'll matter. And I don't think that, and McCain, to his credit, would not play that card. He would not play that card, and I don't think Romney will either. I mean, I think these are serious people who will do it. It's out there to be played. You could talk about the Jeremiah Wright thing. It's old news now, but race matters, and anybody who thinks it doesn't, it does. But trying to figure out exactly how it matters is hard. And I can remember on election day, my one fear was that Obama would lose the election, and everybody would attribute it to race, and that would have been bad. Maybe it would have been, if that's the case, fine, but people would have jumped on that bandwagon too early. And I think that would have been a problem, because you got to step back and look at a lot of the data before you can make that claim, because there are good reasons why somebody would have voted for John McCain over Barack Obama. I mean, if experience matters to you, for example, or being a war hero, there's other things that you could be without having any racial component, to it at all. So this is one of the conundrums of American politics. It exists, but measuring it's a nightmare. I guess we have one more question, then we got to break up.
In 2008, Obama tapped into this division and talked about we're not the red states, we're not the blue states, we're the United States of America. But when he governed, he passed the stimulus bill and the health care bill with no Republican support. I don't think he really looked for Republican support, frankly. Would you comment on that?
Well, first of all, because of the polarization in this country, the Republicans weren't willing to support him. And this has been true for a while. If Romney wins, he's going to have to rely heavily on Republican support. So I think that if Barack Obama could have gotten some Republican support, he would have gone along with it. He's tried to be bipartisan from time to time. George Bush tried to be bipartisan from time to time. Bill Clinton tried to be. It's very hard in this polarized environment. And I think that, that the stimulus package, if McCain had been elected, he would have passed something along that line, maybe not as extensive. Certainly health care would not have happened. And health care, and there will be a referendum on health care, both within the Supreme Court and otherwise. So it's not the final, the final word, but I don't think you can criticize Obama. You can just be unhappy with the polarization of politics, because that's who you have to rely on. You have your core support, and that's the nature of it. George Bush wanted to be the moderate, the compassionate conservative, and he had to govern with his Republican votes and very little Democratic votes. So it's unfortunately a state of just the way the country is right now. So I need to I'm being told to bring this to a close, but I appreciate your time, and this is a great process, and it has its ugly moments, but when you think about the fact that there'll be a peaceful transfer of power, maybe not this election, but the next election, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. So in any case, have a good day. Enjoy this weather.